Not for formal.
Yeah.
So if somebody coughs or laughs or whatever, we can all be happy, right? Cool.
We can start anytime.
Okay.
Loading.
So my name is Canopy Meg Lowman. I'm so happy to be on your fantastic walkway. And I want to do 5 things for the staff. How, what, when, where, and why. Just because maybe that will help them always, if they reach a place where they don't know what to say next, they could think of those 5 things. Because there's a lot about the canopy and we can't cover it all. Hopefully there's copies of my books available. They could read some of the stories and that would be fun too. But why is kind of a good place to start. Humans developed scuba gear in the 1950s, which opened up the coral reefs. If you can believe it, we went to the moon in the 1960s, but nobody went to the treetops until the 1980s. So that's an amazing fact of missing half of the planet. So this whole access to the canopy becomes very urgent and very important because we've overlooked so much for a long time. And so we'll talk in a minute about the methods that we develop, but it really only is in the last 30 years. And that's why there's no center for canopy research anywhere in the world. There's plenty of centers for coral reef research and there's a lot of centers for rainforest research, but usually the forest floor. But maybe this could be the first focus on canopy science, which is pretty exciting. And so why important? Well, we've discovered by canopy access that an estimated, because we don't know for sure, half of the species on the land part of the planet live in the tops of the trees. So that's a lot. And of course, we don't know how many species are on Earth, but we know a whole lot live in the coral reefs. Sadly, that's dying. And we know a whole lot live in the rainforest canopy. So those are the 2, what we call hotspots of biodiversity on the planet. And the rainforest canopy is pretty far behind in terms of exploration. So when we go there, we might be sure to find a new species because nobody's been there before. And I'm sure for most of these trees at the habitat, no one has climbed. And if they have, they haven't sampled for 10 years. You know, many things might only be available 1 month of the year, or something might be pupating and only available every 5 years. So we have a whole lot of catching up to do in our canopy research. So where? Most people believe the tropics have the most diversity. So forest canopy research has centered on the tropics. I've done research in temperate forests as well, which are the forests closer to the poles. They tend to have a winter when there's no biodiversity, whereas in the tropics we have summer all year round, or at least warmer weather. So that has been a focus for a lot of research, knowing that it's probably the most unknown, the most unexplored, and this is a fantastic example. And the staff could talk about the BioBlitz. We'll have results coming in over the next year that will give them a little bit of information to share with your public about cool things that we found in the canopy. And only by sampling the whole tree can we really learn what lives in this forest. So what are we finding? We're finding that, again, over half of the species on land probably live in the tops of trees, and so we need to go there. We know that in the canopy is all the flowers, the fruits, the highest growth. Why the highest growth in the canopy and not on the understory? Why? I'm teasing you. You guys are my class. But you can ask your public. Because the sun. See, the sun is the important energy. So all the best foliage and the fastest growth is going on in the canopy. And so that's why the insects go there, to eat the foliage. That's why the birds go there to eat the insects. That's why the snakes and lizards go there to eat the birds and the insects. So you have all of this life in the canopy that's important to think about. Whereas on the forest floor, sometimes people say, oh, it's quiet, it's boring, we don't see much, because about 1% of light hits the forest floor compared to the canopy, and that light is so important for life. So when we're in the canopy, we're really surrounded by all that hot spots. So how do we do that? And again, you can all make fun of me because I won't be here on your tours, but in 1979, my professor told me oh, if you want to study the rainforest leaves, you have to climb the tree. And I said, oh, please, no, no, no. And he said, yes, yes, yes. So I got a rope from a caving club, and I made a harness. This is like seatbelt webbing, but mine was pretty ugly. It wasn't as nice as this, and made a harness, borrowed a sewing machine, and I made a slingshot out of a piece of metal that I welded into a Y, and got a rubber from an old tire, clip, a flat tire, and got some fishing line, and put the fishing line over the branch, and then I hauled up my rope with the fishing line and climbed the first tree in 1979. And the amazing thing is, one guy in Costa Rica did the same thing, invented the same thing, and I never knew him. We had no internet in 1979, so we both started teaching people to climb. Me in Asia and Australia. I came up to Bogor Botanical Gardens, and I came to Jakarta, and I came to KL and did quite a bit of climbing classes. Tim was still a baby. And then this other guy in Costa Rica did the same thing. And then we met somewhere in 1995. That was very funny. In the meantime, I also knew that with rope, I could only go up by myself. So it's kind of lonely to study the canopy always by yourself. And so in Australia, I worked at a lodge, a place like this in a way, a park, but it has also accommodation. And so we kind of thought, wouldn't it be great to take all the visitors out at once? And that's where the idea of the canopy walkway started. 1985 was the first one in Australia. And actually several months later, the second one was Lambir National Park. Maybe some of your guests will have been there, so that's a very old one too. And then from there, we went to the hot air balloons in the 1990s. That was actually originally designed by the French, and very fun. And there's a raft we can put on the tops of trees, and there's a little sled we can move along, almost like being in a boat out on the reef. And then there's the hot air balloon. And last but not least, if you have $1 million in your budget, you can get a construction crane and put a cement base. And there are about 8 of those in different tropical forests now that people use. It's a permanent site. You can't maybe go as far. And with that, you have to pay the driver of the crane, so it's quite expensive to do research on a crane. But so we have those 4 hows. How do we do it? Ropes, walkways, hot air balloons, and cranes. All kind of fun. And maybe we should say 5, because now we're starting to use drones and remote, which is very cool, because we can all sit here in our deck chairs and you can operate your canopy research by standing still. That'll be amazing. And so I think those are kind of the history and the rudiments. And then we can talk about what's out there and whether or not we do a conversation, or you want me to just summarize the plant part and have Irshad do the bird part. You can think about that. I don't know which is easier or better.
For wildlife, maybe Mr. Irshad.
Yeah, take a turn, and then I can come back and talk about the shade leaves and the emergent trees and the layers and all the botanical stuff. But Birdman, come along. Plant woman will exit.
Yeah, you can stand here.
You'll have to stick there.
I guess you have to face them. I love looking at your back.
But you can join him.
Oh, I
because-
see.
Yeah,
Okay.
because it's just for internal, so
Yeah.
don't worry about it.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
Fun.
Well, I think you have to identify all the trees you have here. Of course, you said it best already. Main street in a rainforest is the canopy. This is where most of the plant, because of sunlight, here's where most plant life can be found, and therefore plant eaters and those that eat the plants, eaters. So this is Main Street. And you'll find that many of the nocturnal squirrels, for example, a lot of the nests you can point out nests of a squirrel's nest, the kind of birds that you get visiting here. And you probably have malcoas coming on a tree like this. You should know every tree here. And because,
Or at least Like you should be able to say, oh, Campnospermum, look at those big leaves. That's the one I've got here, by the way. You should, and then say, oh my gosh, I don't know this one. I feel like sometimes it's okay to tell people,
Of course,
there's
no, be
so many
honest,
you don't
yeah.
know. But he's right that over time,
You'll
people will ask you and you'll be wanting to tell them that, and maybe you make, I don't know, signage out here.
Yeah,
maybe
yeah,
you
the
have
sign- the sign
a map
that-
people carry.
Yeah,
Yeah.
the signage is supposed to be the canopy layers and canopy
Yeah.
layers and one more I can't remember.
Because over time you want, when someone says, oh, Irshad, I saw a white-bellied woodpecker, he'll say, where? Oh, that green tree. You know, you're going to want to have something that tells, oh, it was the Shoria that's at 70 meters along this, you know, whatever. You need some kind of reminder.
And you can see that tree is in fruit now. Take note of what comes to feed on it. And it might not be in the daytime, it might be a nocturnal creature. And if it's not there in your morning